Welcome back to the Vegan Heathens podcast. I'm Drew.
And I'm Freedom.
And today we thought we'd talk to you a little bit about how we got to where we are. Neither of us grew up in vegetarian or vegan households, and both of us grew up in religious families.
Yep, so we thought today's podcast would be our conversion stories, so to speak.
Yeah, so Freedom has a little more interesting story on the religious front. My story was just a little bit more boring. I thought a lot about religion and stopped believing in it. So
I don't know if it's more interesting, but I do have a story behind how I became atheist / humanist.
Well, let's hear it.
All right, well, I grew up religious, but not any particular type of sect. Is that the correct word? It was Christian, but we didn't...
Oh yeah, I was going to silence my phone before we started.
All right, so conversion stories about my journey to atheism. I grew up, I would call it religious, but we never really went to church. My mother read the Bible a lot. It was the Christian Bible, Old and New Testament. And we learned to say our prayers. We said grace at the kitchen table, and I always grew up believing that God was kind of like a big brother, our father, kind of looking over me, and he had a plan for me, but you know, life gets in the way, and so I was constantly being told that I would have to constantly pray to make sure I was keep going into the right track. And so that was kind of my experience growing up with religion. I never hardly ever went to church. And I did have friends that had different religions, like, well, not really different religions, but I had Jehovah's Witnesses friends, Mormon friends, Catholic friends, and sometimes they would invite me to their churches, and I would go. But it wasn't until I started getting older that I had this problem with the concept of hell, and I kind of just decided to just say, you know, hell is something that we know exists because that's what the Bible says, but we don't really know for sure if God does send people to hell, or maybe the really evil people go to hell just because you don't believe in a certain way or you don't follow the commandments completely, that you would go. So that's how I kind of justified me believing, even when I had a hard time understanding why we had different religions and getting punished for it eternally. And that was the extent of my religion. I didn't even bother to read the Bible. Like I said, I hardly went to church. I had different friends who were religious. I just kind of accepted it as the way of the world. And when I had my child, when I gave birth to my son, I decided that, because I knew ahead of time that I had married someone who wasn't religious. He never used the word atheist, so to me, even then, I would even consider atheism as someone who hated God, not so much as a non-belief. So I knew it, because I married someone who was secular, I was going to have to take my son to church if I wanted to, and I always felt that you had to go to church because that's where your morals came from. So when he was old enough to kind of understand, about 3 or 4, I thought, because he was walking and talking, I decided to find a church, and one of the ones that I related to was the non-denominational one, and they were very friendly and accepting. I loved the daycare. I liked the messages on the Sunday sermons. I liked the music. They did a lot of volunteering stuff, so I enjoyed it very much, and I was into it for a few years, and I never had a problem with it. I felt that I was right at home. One of the things right off the bat, though, that I had a problem with was this concept of what they call saving souls. They were really big about going out there and preaching the word, and they even had a banner, I remember, in the background of the church about how many souls that they had saved for that year. So
wow.
They were like at 800 people.
Was it like digital and just counted up? Or?
It wasn't a digital, it was a cloth banner, but I guess they can move the numbers. And so I always thought that was kind of strange, because to me, I thought religion was kind of more of a personal experience, that you could choose to believe or not, or have a different belief. The idea that we had to go out there and force it. One of the things that I still remember to this day was during the Bible study classes that we had, one of the missionaries that had come back from Japan started talking about his trip to Japan, and he all of a sudden he started crying, really sad, because he was absolutely convinced that the souls that he wasn't able to save when he was there were going to go to hell. And there were just these little things in the back of my head when I was at the church. That was like, how can we think that about people? Why is it important that we save people's souls? But
I didn't even realize until this podcast how one of the things that we think is going to be interesting about the podcast is that we're very different, despite having arrived at the same conclusions. We're very different.
Yeah.
So I did, given what you've just said, I wanted to kind of share how many ways that I was the opposite of you.
Oh, really?
So we went to church every Sunday. We didn't miss. The only times, the times that I missed church from the time I was born till I graduated from high school, I could count on both my hands.
Wow.
And it was because I was sick, or because, I think maybe one vacation we skipped church on Sunday and the kids were really excited. We didn't want to say anything in case mom remembered to go. They knew, of course. But even, it was a family thing. We went every Sunday.
And
but
it's Catholic, right?
Yeah, we were Catholics, Roman Catholics. And we kept it very private at home, though. It wasn't something we talked about very often as a family. It was something, we didn't read the Bible together. We were encouraged, I think, to say prayers. I used to say prayer every night before bed. So it was a very formal thing. And we were taught to keep it private. I always hated that. I always thought, because I believed in religion, I believed what the Bible said: the bad people go to hell, the good people go to heaven. So why wouldn't I spread it? I mean, I have to. I mean, how could I live with myself knowing that all my neighbors were going to hell, or all of the Buddhists were going to hell? How could I live with myself? So I had to go spread the word.
That is very opposite how I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so that's, I guess that's and I taught Sunday school for a while at my church. I went on Catholic Heart Work Camp trips, which is where the Catholic Church sponsors a group of young students to go and maybe build a house, or I think we were refurbishing a battered women's shelter where we tore out all the old furniture and we got to throw couches out the window and let them shatter in the concrete parking lot below. But anyway, so I grew up very much a part of the church for a very long time.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I had missed it. I mean, my mother was definitely a heavy believer. She had the Bible with her all the time. She was always quoting scripture. But no, church was very seldom. In fact, the only time I even remember going to church is, like I said earlier, was when I was invited to go by my friends who had different religions that I was following.
We were the ones that brought friends into our church. One of my friends called it Catholic aerobics. When he had to come and join us, and he had to kneel and stand and sit and kneel.
And I just remember the more I went to church, even though I enjoyed the community part of it, I made friends there, the sermons it just started becoming more of a guilt trip. The more I was listening to these sermons, the more they were really emphasizing how bad we are and how we need God, and that even they were even saying missing church. I remember even one of the sermons, the pastor was saying that he was so proud of his son because he never missed church, like you were saying, and he even got to the point where he was out at a camping trip with his friends, and he even came back on Sunday. And one of my first thought was like, wow, like, why would you, like, he was out with his friends for the weekend, just, it was a Sunday. But, and so the more I started listening to the sermons, the more it just, and then they started implying about gays. They weren't coming out straight about that gays are bad, but they kept putting little hints in there that was easily caught on, subtle things. And the more I was listening to it, the more uncomfortable I started feeling. But I still kept going because I felt, I don't have an answer on why we're here on this earth and why our morals are here. And even if I don't agree everything with what the pastor says, it doesn't mean that there's no God. The pastor could have it wrong, or, maybe there was something that I wasn't getting. I still felt the need that if I prayed about it and if I came and listened to it, somehow or another, God was relaying his personal message to me through them. And one day, the pastor announced, it was when my son was about 5 years old at the time. One day, the pastor announced that he was going to do this one-on-one mentorship, and it was with this program called Through the Bible in 1 year. And at this point, um, I was almost 30, and I had never read the Bible. I knew scriptures and everything from my mother, but I never had read it. And it was a one-on-one mentorship, and they paired you with the same sex and an older person. So I had a woman who was older than me who was going to help me not only read the Bible, but it kind of was more of a personal guidance. What's going on with your life? Let's talk about it. Let me give you some tidbits on what I know because I'm older and wiser. So I was really looking forward to it. And so I got all into it. I got the workbook Through the Bible in 1 year. I got a nice Bible. And then I guess maybe this was my big mistake. So listen up, people. I decided, okay, well, the Bible's very wordy. And I do not understand it all. And I really believe that it was an historical book, that these were historical, accurate, chronological. So I was like, who best to help me explain the Bible as I'm reading this than a Bible scholar?
Of course, that makes sense. That's kind of what we all, if you're sick, you go to a doctor. If you're, and that seems reasonable. If you start from the assumption that there is a God and that the Bible's His word, that makes sense.
So I looked around online, and one of the main Bible scholars came up was a gentleman by the name of Bart Ehrman. And he only did the New Testament. I remember there was another woman, and I'm sorry I don't have her name off of hand, who did the Old Testament. She was really good too. In fact, I still have the CDs, so I'll have to look her up, and maybe we can even put a link on there. And so I got her Old Testament on CD, her lectures on, because they're both professors, and so it was their lecture series. And then I got Bart Ehrman's New Testament, and I was listening to him as I was reading the Bible and during the workbook. And long story short, it didn't take me very long to start doubting everything that I had thought about the Bible and the morals and the historical and the chronological and everything. And by the time I had done listening to the lectures and reading the Bible, I had lost my faith very happily, as you can see. And actually, it wasn't. It was a weight off my shoulder, but I do want to say I was really big on praying. I thought praying was some sort of a way to get through God. So during my questioning phase, I really was going to my pastor and my mentor, and I wasn't coming out and saying I don't believe and this is all BS and everything, but I was really hinting that I was having difficulties. And they kept saying, why don't you pray about it? Why don't you pray about it? So it was kind of scary, because I remember driving to Bible study at night, and I pulled the car over, and I just looked up and I started crying, and I said, I don't believe. I don't believe in you. I do not believe that you exist. And I was shaking. I'm like, okay, he's going to kill me right now. God is going to send a lightning bolt.
I remember that moment too, very, very vividly. The moment, my story, I approached it from a very different direction. It wasn't as much of an emotional direction, but it led me to the exact same place. The first time I ever started really thinking about the reasons for God was when we got a priest who was very intelligent. He would tell us the Latin meaning of words, and he would show us a passage in the Bible and say, wow, he said this. This is our New American Bible version, or whatever version he used. But he would say in the original Latin or the original Greek, this is the word he used. And if he would tell us, well, this word appears 15 times, and this is what it means in each context. So he was one of those guys that would just really, and he was very big on Catholic apologetics.
Okay.
He would give us reasons, proofs for why God existed, or else it never would have really occurred to me to really doubt his existence, probably not at the time. And I loved those proofs, because that was how I was going to, if I ever met one of those evil atheists who didn't believe in God, I was going to give him one of these logical proofs for God. But I could never stop imagining the other side. If I would before bed, I would say my prayer, I'd climb into bed, and then I would think about, okay, so the priest said there must be a man greater than every other man, and that is that being is God. And well, why can't that just be like the president of the United States? So I thought they're like, what if there's nothing above him? Then that would make him, and that doesn't necessarily mean. So I would think about these logical proofs for God and go, but if an atheist says this to me, how am I going to counter his argument?
Yeah.
And that started when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade.
Oh, wow.
And it went all the way through, maybe older. I might have been older. I'm really bad at remembering how I was when certain events happened. But it was, because we got the priest after was junior high, so it had to be before junior high. So anyway.
Wow.
I remember I still tried to, I would have these discussions with myself, and I always ended with the atheist winning. You know, it always ended, there was always an argument that the atheist came up with that I couldn't counter. But in my mind, that was never a problem, because eventually, you know, I'll think of another thing. I'll think of something else. I just had to think about this and reflect on it. And I started going on to apologist web pages and saying, okay, how can I respond to this atheist argument? Somebody give me this answer that'll overcome it. And it ended up being like 3 or 4 years of where there was no answer for the atheist argument, and there was just this moment. I remember there's a very specific moment where I was like, what if the only reason I'm still searching for the answer to this atheist argument is just because I want to believe and there's really no good reason? And as soon as I had that thought, it just shifted me. I was still going to, even in college, I was still going to church. This was pretty early in college. I mean, this was 6 to 8 months into my freshman year, I think. I was still going to church every Sunday. And it dawned on me that that's exactly what was happening, that no experience I've ever had could be interpreted as a religious experience any more than it could be interpreted as a Buddhist religious experience or a Jewish religious experience or a Native American spirit or whatever. And
this was high school that you were thinking about this? Well,
I mean, it was obvious through high school and college that none of the experiences I've ever had could really be attributed to religion. You know, I lost my pen and I said a prayer and then I found my pen. You know, I was worried about how I would play in a football game that night, and I prayed, and then I wasn't nervous when I played. Well, but that's not. No. Couldn't God do better than that if He was really going to interact with me? I mean, that's just everyday experience.
And it's strange. On a side note too, when I would pray things like that, it didn't even occur to me how trivial that was at the time. Looking back on it, I just this is the extent of God's power.
He can't really change things. I mean, he can make the die roll from the 4 to the 3, but he's not gonna turn the die into a candle or whatever.
Yeah, but I always just felt that. I guess I just always had held this belief that He had planned this perfect life for me, and I had to make sure through free will and praying that I would stay on this path. He couldn't choose to keep me on the path, but I would have to find my way of doing it. And all the things that we can convince ourselves. And it wasn't even, and so once that happened, once I actually just said out loud for the first time, I do not believe in God. I do not believe that you're there. It was as though, I will almost want to say it was like a spiritual experience, because once that fear went away, that it's okay to not believe in God and to be open about it, this weight came over me. This weight just came off of me, and it wasn't very long after that I quit the church. I took my son out of church, and I started looking for, I guess you can say, a purpose. Now that I wasn't going to go through the Bible, through my morals and upbringings anymore, I needed to find something.
Yeah, and that's the next step, and that's that moment that you shared is exactly how I felt. I remember sitting in my dorm room. I was at my computer at my desk, and there was a Frisbee game going out in the courtyard below. And the moment I said to myself, I already don't believe in God, and I'm just trying to find reasons to believe, is the moment I admitted that, heart was just thumping in my chest. I remember I kind of just the blood drained from my face. I got goosebumps. I was like, what's gonna happen? This is that thing I could never do. This is the thing that religion taught me from birth that you can never do, is give up a belief in God. This is the worst thing that a human being can do.
Yeah.
And
to deny God is
I actually say, you know, I deny the Holy Spirit. I remember around that time
Yeah.
there was a YouTube craze going. Do you remember this? Where
Yes.
they would give you a cookie to deny the Holy Spirit
Mm-hmm.
because there's a passage in the Bible that says like that's the one thing you can never undo or can never be. So something like that. I don't remember exactly the Bible verse, but basically it said, you know,
Yes.
someone who denies the Holy Spirit can never be forgiven.
Even Michael
So
Shermer.
I wasn't gonna say that yet, but
yeah, I know. Yeah, because even
but
Michael
it didn't.
Shermer has said that technically he's still going to go to heaven because he's never repented on that. Those words is I deny the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, but I was, you know, so I was in that moment where I was terrified, and it just very quickly washed away, and it became that was so silly, like why, and the world just changes. I mean, all of
Yeah.
a sudden, instead of it seeming like just a normal thing that we're all supposed to struggle to believe, you go, it's silly. Why are you struggling to believe something that's not? Why,
Yeah.
you know, it just your perception. If you're still religious and you happen to be watching this, it's almost. I think it's almost impossible to explain how quickly and how dramatically your perception of all these things changes from the context.
And I know you and I had similar deconversion experiences, and I do understand the more humanist atheists that we meet, I do understand there are people that took it much harder when they realize that chances are there is no God, and they're still struggling. So there's so many different people out there. Just because you say you don't believe in God, it's not going to be as that kind of great as we felt. I know people who are still personally struggling with the idea that this is it and their life is going to be over one day, and there's no eternity of of happiness and families. But no, it was definitely a great experience to just be able to say I don't believe in God, but I needed to do something at that point. It wasn't enough for me just to say I don't believe in God anymore. In fact, I actually became very much like an activist. I almost felt it was my duty at that point. Before, it's funny, before when I was religious, I thought it was wrong for it to go out and convert other people. But now that I understood more about atheism and all this times that we've been lied to and how ignorant we are of the Bible and everything else, I felt it was kind of my duty to go out and spread the word about atheism.
Yeah, I remember that. And you get angry, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe not. Maybe some people are very much more emotionally mature than I am, but I remember feeling so angry that all of this was going on, and now, wait a minute, it's all silly. Like, why was I told this? Why did my community? And I'm not just blaming any one person, like a parent or a priest, but
No.
you know, all of that part of society. It was you know, it's very, you know, it's easy to be angry when you kind of see it a different way.
Yeah, especially to me is that a lot of people will say, yeah, we know this is BS. Yeah, we don't have the answers. Yeah, we know this is wrong, but. And so it's just the idea that just as a society, it seems like we're so afraid of the unknown that we'd rather just insert what we feel more comfortable in and we'll let it go that way. And it isn't so bad, except we can obviously see the lot of the harm that religion does. It's like we take the good parts about it and we ignore the bad parts, and that to me was so vital to go out and say, look, you don't have to believe in God to live a good life and be happy. And also, look what it's doing. Look what it's doing to creating problems in our households, in our homes, in our society. So yeah, I felt that I needed to do something, and luckily, there was a huge movement going on, with Richard Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens. Those are my heroes, and so there was a huge movement around that time, around 2009, I'd say, about people having support groups for people who had left religion, and I tried the Unitarian thing for a while. I did enjoy it, but it was still too churchy for me. So I wanted the community. I wanted to be around together with like-minded people. It wasn't enough for me just to say I don't believe in God. And at the time, there was a local organization where I was living that was starting. It was called Central Valley Atheists and Other Skeptics. And we were going, and unfortunately that kind of died down, and one of the professors, local professors here, actually picked it back up, and we called ourselves Stanislaus Skeptics for a while. And I enjoyed it very much. I mean, it was something that we did with our family. We had lots of activities that we were doing. We did a huge protest for the invocation at the local city council.
What's the invocation? Oh,
The,
is
invoca-
that
the
what is
prayer.
that?
They do the invocation before they start their meetings.
So the city council would say a public prayer.
A public prayer, and it was always ending in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. And so we got on board together as a huge community and was trying to fight that. We didn't win, but still, it was nice to get together like that. And
yeah, you said earlier what I thought was interesting. You said, okay, I lost religion and now I needed a way to find meaning.
Yeah,
and
going to church
me,
was enough for me, but now that I didn't have it.
And then for me, I had the same, not necessarily the search for meaning, but all of a sudden, this didn't occur to me for a while, actually, but it occurred to me that I needed to start thinking about morals rather than just remembering morals from what I was taught when I was a kid. I had to start thinking about right from wrong. One in particular that followed very quickly is when I was very young, my parents were not hateful people. They were very loving people. They didn't teach me hate of any particular group. And I grew up on an emotional level, not being like anti-homosexual. On an emotional level, I thought they were fine. But religion, is pretty clearly written in the Bible, at least in the version that I wrote. And I think there are people that make arguments that the Bible doesn't have anything to say about homosexuality if you go back and look at the original languages. And I'm not a biblical scholar to get into that. But the version of the Bible that I had said very plainly, I can't remember anymore. It's like 15,
a man
20
who
years.
sleeps with a man
but,
as he sleeps with a woman.
Yeah, I mean, a very important, like Paul or one of the major apostles said, if you're it said basically, if you're homosexual, you'll not enter the kingdom of heaven. If you're a homosexual, you can't, you're going to go to hell. And that was it. And I said, well, then obviously it's a sin. It's obviously wrong. Now, I was pretty rational, but I didn't go ahead and lash out against gays and hold up signs that say, die, fags, die, or whatever. But I looked at it as a sin, just like sex outside of marriage or abortion or any of the other sins where, okay, a gay person's not worse than anybody else as long as he doesn't act on it. But this idea of gay pride, you can't be proud of a sin and be, that's ridiculous. Who would say like liar pride or like murderer pride? It's a sin. You can't be proud of it. That's terrible. And I carried that with me all through. I would fight against the out and out people that were anti-homosexual, saying that if you're gay to go ahead, no, love them. It's a sin. A lot of you guys masturbate. A lot of you guys, a lot of us are sinners. You can love the sinner. It's not any worse than any other crime.
Yes.
But at the same time, you can't be proud of it. You can't act on it.
Yes.
So anyway, that was one of the when you lose religion, you have to start thinking about right and wrong for yourself. And that was one of the first things that I thought, well, why is it a sin? Why does it matter? Who is it hurting? And I wasn't very sophisticated in how I went about choosing my underlying values because it didn't occur to me at the time, but we have our underlying values. They come from society. They come from our parenting.
Yes.
Nobody's going to... I didn't want to murder anybody because I felt that was wrong, because I know that's wrong. It's not even purely logical. Some people think they can derive values from pure logic. Well, it's if I kill you, then someone will kill me, and we can get into this in another podcast. That's not true. I don't believe you can derive values from pure logic. At some level, you get to a really basic level where it's just your biology sets some things and so on. Yes. But anyway, the point is, I had these values. I had these things that were right, and I had these morals. And the only challenge now was kind of discovering what rules do I already, without thinking, apply to decide what's right and wrong, and am I applying them consistently? And homosexuality was a really obvious one where, no, I wasn't. Because in almost every other area, almost all the other things I thought were sinful harmed somebody. So why is this one an exception? Why do I think this one's a sin? Well, I guess without this religious belief that it's a sin, I have no reason to condemn it. And all of a sudden, I did a 180 on that.
And that's how it was for me, too. I always grew up not accepting the standard sins of things, but it wasn't until we started the group Stanislaus Skeptics, which is now moved on to Stanislaus Humanist, that I actually started for the first time understanding what it meant to be a skeptic. I have never experienced that in my entire life. I just memorized facts and datas in school. I did what I was told in school. I did it. I graduated high school. By the time I got into college, I decided to get married, so I didn't experience the college the way that maybe would have helped me at the time. And so when I joined the humanist group, the skeptic group, I started understanding how it is that we can be critical thinking about it, how we can be rational, how we can be skeptical about things. And that actually, like you said, with our future podcast, we can go into it about how we can actually use that to derive our morals. We didn't need the Bible to do it. But going into their second segment, when I started learning how to be more critical thinking and using skepticism and rational thinking to live my life, and I started being open-minded more towards being a vegan.
Yeah. So after leaving religion, things started falling like dominoes.
Yep.
I won't go into too many details, but a lot of the things that I had believed were just automatically wrong, I started thinking from a perspective of, well, maybe it's not wrong for everybody, or maybe it's a personal choice.
How is it wrong? Yeah.
So the most recent one of those things to fall was this idea, growing up religious, you're taught that you have dominion over animals. They're just less than you, and that's just the way it is. You have a special divine soul that is better than the animal soul, and it goes to heaven and theirs doesn't, and there's nothing, and my vegan conversion was a long process. I think it predated my deconversion, but
So you were atheist longer than vegan, like
yes,
me. So
yeah.
We both come from that.
We're both atheists first, yeah.
Yeah, because I became atheist, I would say 2009. I became vegan in 2012. So
She's been doing this a lot longer than I have. haven't quite reached my 1-year vegan anniversary yet.
Okay. So you're still a baby, but
it'll be a few more months.
But you've been. So how long have you been an atheist now? What would you?
Probably since 2005, 6. So about 10 years.
Okay. So you've been okay. So it's taken you a while. But how did I? But I want to know. I'm curious too.
So honestly, probably my first. You don't change a major thing in your life like this without a lot of Both of us are simplifying our religious conversions as well. I'm sure
yes.
a part of it, we have to be willing to think differently from those around us. We have to be willing to reject a truth that everyone in our family holds. There's a lot of personal experience that has to lead you to this path. And I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, but one thing that stands out from my childhood, and I think a lot of kids have a similar story, maybe not exactly like this, but I remember, so we had these great Thanksgivings. We rented out the church hall where my grandma lived, and I have a huge family on that side, and we would have 3 big tables full of food. We had a giant potluck, and I suspect my mom embellishes this story a little bit, but I've heard it enough times that now this is how I remember it too. So I guess I had a big stick of venison that my Uncle Jerry always brought to the wedding, to the Thanksgiving feast.
So you had deer for Thanksgiving.
So I had deer, and we had everything. I mean, we had chicken and deer and turkey and ham and everything. I mean, there were like 40 of us running around this church hall. And
no
I guess
animal was safe for you.
I was munching on this venison stick that my uncle had brought, and he was telling us the story of how he shot a deer. And apparently I was like, "You shot Bambi? That's cruel." and my family told this story for years and made fun of me for it, because it was obviously completely hypocritical to complain about the deer that was shot. And it turns out that was the story he was telling was of the deer that he had made into the deer sausage.
You were eating the deer
and
he
I was
shot.
eating the deer from the story.
While you were complaining that he shot a deer.
and looking back, for years, that story was an embarrassment to me because I was so inconsistent. I could say one thing and be doing another. And looking back now, oh no, that was a moment of clarity for me. If I had been in a different setting, if I hadn't been surrounded by people that eat meat, I might have put down the sausage and said, "Oh, well, this is wrong." Yeah, but instead, I took, this was pre-challenge everything. This was when authority was always right. So instead, it became that's what has to happen. That has to be reality. That's just the way the world works. We all eat meat. So it must be okay to shoot the deer in the head.
Yeah, and I know probably get maybe some disagreement about it, but I do believe on the sense that just like religion, you're indoctrinated to eat meat as well. So,
Yeah, and I want to be careful when we say indoctrinated. When I use that word, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think anybody's sitting there going, ha, 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 "I'm going to twist his little mind into
no,
meeting."
as in you're
It's
taught
just
what your parents are taught,
it's
what
what
their
you
parents are
learn.
taught.
Yeah,
Yes,
and it's
what you learn.
unavoidable to be indoctrinated into some sort
Yes,
of belief.
which is why I didn't have any animosity towards any family members at all when I left the religion. I saw them almost like victims of of it as well. And same thing with the meat eating. It never occurred to me at all during my whole life that eating meat, just like being religious, was an option. I did
Yeah,
not know
right.
that you could do that. I just thought it was just a part of life.
Yeah.
You might not understand God's ways, but of course there's a God. And, it might be hard that you're eating an animal that was once alive, but how else were you going to survive? And so, yes, when I lost my faith and I started becoming more skeptical and started thinking things differently, I started realizing that we have a lot more choices out there than we think we do.
Yeah, I remember. So shortly after that experience, I came to the belief that, well, if you would be willing to kill the food yourself, then you can eat it. If you wouldn't be willing to do it yourself, then you should be vegetarian. And I think that's pretty reasonable. I think a lot of people agree with that.
You're a very good thinker for being young. I'm sorry, I never thought like you.
but I could though. I mean, I could do it. I was okay with that, and I did. I caught fish and I cut their heads off and then I filleted them with my dad's help. I helped at Grandpa's farm. This might be too gross, but whatever. So we ate fried pig's brain, and my uncle actually took me and helped me take a saw and literally saw through the brain of the pig, and with bare hands, not even gloves, scooped out the brains, and we prepared it and we put it in the deep fryer and everything. My hands smelled for like a week after that. I couldn't wash them enough. Anyway,
I'm from North Carolina. I never had to do with anything on a farm, but fishing and hunting were definitely a part of the social acceptance over there. My stepfather was always bringing home something he shot and killed, and we were always helping him clean it and everything. So I never killed anything myself, which maybe it's a little different. I was more, you're in the kitchen, you're cleaning the kill, but you're not going out and killing anything.
Right. But you think you could have, right? I mean, if you had been asked, maybe you could have.
Well, maybe it just, I don't know how I would have felt going out and actually having to kill, but I will tell you a story before we became vegan. I think it's important as a parent to let your children experience things. And he never, I didn't want him to go hunting. I felt at that point, even though I wasn't vegan, I just felt that hunting was extreme. But I took him to shooting ranges, and they had shooting classes, and so they would show him how to do the targets. But I felt he should understand fishing. So there is a fish farm not too far away from us, and I thought that would be kind of a good way to start, because it would be an automatic guaranteed catch. It wasn't like we have to go out to a lake or river and sit there for hours. And so I wanted him to actually experience what it was like to catch a fish and then take it home and everything. And we went up to the fish farm, and they gave us these little cubes, maybe cheeses they were. And the way it works is you have to keep everything you catch. You're not allowed to throw anything back into the water. So we each decided that we would each catch a fish and then bring it home for dinner. And we did. We each caught a fish, and then we put it in this little bucket, and then we took the bucket with the fish to the guy, and the guy said right there, "Would you like me to clean them for you?" So they were already prepared. And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much. That'd be nice." And it didn't even occur to me, like, these fish were still alive until he put them onto the mat. And then my son was standing right there watching these fish, chop head, just clean,
You
and
cut
put
the heads off first?
Yeah. And No. I'm sorry. He didn't cut the heads.
Yeah,
He
because
left them
the
on.
way
He
we did
slid
it
them
when I
on
was a
there.
family, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
The fish is still moving as you
Yes.
fillet it.
No, you're right. It
Its
wasn't
muscles off its body.
because I remember when I was cooking it later. I was like, "What do I do with the head? I never." But I'll tell you what. That was a very silent card ride home.
Yeah.
None of us could talk, and we weren't even vegans then. It was just the experience of seeing a life in front of us being taken for food, and even then I was still justifying it as a meat eater. Like, this fish did not have to die for me. I could just go to the store and buy one that was already wrapped and ready to go. So yeah, it definitely that experience kind of did change my view a little bit on how it worked. But I do know people that enjoy fishing and hunting as a sport. I don't get that part.
Well, I went and I loved to fish as a kid, and I haven't actually been in a setting where that's come up yet. That's a big thing when I visit home. I'm all the way out on the West Coast now. My family's back east. But it was it was a long time that I told you my tiny little story, but that was the only kernel of anything approaching veganism I had all the way until just like a year and a half ago. It was another pretty sudden change. I had a few experiences with vegans. I remember there was a dinner with there was a fundraising group. Our pre-veterinary club had a fundraising group, and we went to a restaurant with another club that was raising money in the same event. And so we sat with them, and it was the Indian American Association, I think, or it may not have had that name, but it was for students of Indian origin. And I sat next to somebody who I didn't realize at the time was vegan or at least vegetarian, and she saw me eating a hamburger or something, and she said, "How can you be planning to go into the veterinary field if you're eating meat?" And I was like, "Well, you can't have crazy beliefs and then be a veterinarian. Like, a veterinarian has to be practical. They have to be willing to put animals to sleep when they need it. Like, you can't have these insane beliefs." I said it almost like that, and then looked at her face because all of that had been an insult to her, and I hadn't realized it. And I remember thinking, darn, because she was also very attractive, and we'd been having a very good conversation up to that point, and I realized that I had just ruined that. So that was my first experience with somebody who was vegan or vegetarian, and it's had no impact on me other than to be embarrassed that I had phrased it that way. I mean, maybe I thought about it a little bit, but it didn't really bother me. It didn't seem a contradiction. Yeah. And all through undergrad, all through vet school. Vet school, I was exposed to a lot of vegans. There were a lot of veterinarians in my class who were vegan.
Oh, wow.
And so I argued with them a lot. Actually really a lot of the same way as my religious conversion story. I met a vegan and I argued with them. And I wrote a big article in the school paper about how it's not wrong to kill something as long as he has a humane life. And it was all focused on, well, you don't care when you're dead, so what? It's not like it's not like you're mad that you're dead.
And the animals being of use, it's not like you're just killing it to leave it there. You're actually using it to provide food for yourself and families. And
yeah, I didn't think that impacted the moral value of killing. Well, I mean, I guess I would divide it into two. There's the wrong in killing something, and then there's the benefit from it. And you always have to weigh those two things in my mind.
Oh, okay.
But I said there's no wrong in killing it. I said that's the wrong involved with killing an animal humanely and painlessly is zero. Of course, that allowed me to, it didn't even occur to me to think about the fact that almost every single factory farmed animal has a miserable life up until they're killed. So even with that philosophy, I should have stopped eating at every fast food restaurant and every supermarket. I should have stopped eating the meat and the eggs, especially from those places. But I didn't really know that at the time.
No.
But the point was, in theory, if I could kill an animal, if I could sneak up out in the wild and kill it all of a sudden, that's not wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just, why would that be wrong? He doesn't even know he's dead. And that somehow, it's funny. I think any vegan who's listening to this is like, "What? That's crazy." And then most media are going, "Yeah, that's true." And because that was the one. There's all these reasons to be vegan, and I'd heard them all. Most of them just require you to reduce, though. It's very environmental. It's environmentally freaking to go vegan. Okay, so I should reduce meat consumption. It's the high level of meat consumption that we have might be causing some of our obesity, and especially processed meat might be causing our colon cancer. So we should cut out certain kinds of meat and eat less meat. The only argument that made me kind of realize being vegan was the only reasonable option was changing that view. But I didn't change that view the first time I came across it. I wrote that article in the vet school newsletter, and it was still 3-4 more years before I changed my view. I actually I dated and lived with a vegetarian for 2 years. And she fixed me vegetarian food frequently. And I actually gave her a hard time at some point. Sometime during vet school, I went on to Reddit. I went on to the vegan subreddit just to argue with the idiot vegans on there, just to tell these people they're crazy and that their views are extreme. And so that's going on in the back of my head. I'm presenting some of these arguments, but I'm having them overcome by vegans. And I'm seeing the data on the environment and on health. And by the way, just to be clear, I don't think vegan is automatically healthy or necessarily the healthiest diet.
No.
But you can be a perfectly healthy vegan. So I learned that. I learned that it's easy to be a healthy vegan, even, and it's much healthier than the average diet, certainly.
Yeah, and you're coming from someone of, I've been married now for almost 18 years, and now we've been vegan for 3. But if I'm coming from being with someone who, even if I did vegetarian, he would get like, what is this?
Yeah, I used to give
the meat had to be the center focus of everything that we had. So definitely steak and
that's how I grew
potatoes.
up too, for sure.
Yes, and side note, he's from Norway, and so he grew up eating a lot of fish, and that was one thing he didn't want anymore. So we hardly had any fish in the house because he was done.
All red meat.
He wanted the red meat and the potatoes, and I think the veganism was just a happenstance for us. It wasn't anything we were searching out for it. It's just because of my deconversion, I guess, from being religious to atheism, and not just being an atheist, but actually being skeptical and learning how to, use skeptical thinking in my daily life. We watched, just because it was on, we watched a movie called Forks Over Knives, and it was so powerful and so informative that, because now I was starting to think differently because of being a skeptic, that I kind of had to take it seriously.
I've actually never watched any of those documentaries, believe it or not. None of them. Cowspiracy, Earthlings, Forks Over Knives. I've never seen a single one.
They're very, very good documentaries.
I don't want to anymore because I don't need them at this point.
And a side note,
it's just going to make me sad.
When Drew and I talked earlier too, I'm not ashamed to admit that Richard Dawkins kind of helped push me over that fence. I know a lot of people are saying, I never read The God Delusion and I still became atheist. He helped me.
Yeah, so I could see. We were having the conversation, and I told her when I read that book I was annoyed because I was like, duh, and I read it because I feel like I should, but it doesn't mean I don't think it's a great book. I wanted to throw it at other people and say, read this.
It was that book that kind of helped me say, okay, what I'm doing is good, and keep going. But it was the Forks Over Knives, and it was the health point of view that made me started thinking, okay, our diet is really bad. I'm already obese. I've always been overweight, and my husband from Norway was very good, very in good shape, tall and slender, and over the years he got very, very heavy, and I got up to 360 pounds. My husband got into 280 pounds, I believe it was. And so I realized that even though I knew we were eating way too much, it was a lot of red meat and everything, I really didn't even know you could be a vegan. And seeing that documentary and showing the health aspects of being a plant-based diet was so just inspiring to me. I was like, let's give this a try. Let's see if we could do it. And we wanted to stick with it. So we said, let's just do 1 meal a day. And so we stuck with breakfast, and we're big cereal eaters, and I still am.
It's easy.
And I know.
Buy soy milk.
Yeah, exactly. And so I know probably the Forks Over Knives people are going to say, hey, do oatmeal.
Yeah.
Cereal is still processed, and it is true. But, for us, it was just as simple as changing our milk. And I'll tell you, when we first changed it, I didn't like it. I was like, ooh, this is like really, really watery skim milk. Why are they trying to compete with milk? But we started testing different ones: almond, soy, rice, oat milk. We found our favorites and we loved it. And we started noticing the difference right away. And then we started just incorporating more plant-based or plant-strong food into the other meals, and it just became just something we did. We were just starting to eat more greens and more beans and more whole grains, more whole foods. And then I don't know how it started, but I really started getting hooked onto these documentaries about how bad it is for the environment and how bad it is for the animals and the suffering. And then I could not deny it anymore. I could not keep my mind closed anymore to what was happening. And I really tried to persuade myself that, you could still eat meat and do it ethically and environmentally. And I could not live knowing that I was going to be hypocritical that way. And we decided to become vegan, and that was 3 years ago. And it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made. It was almost like my deconversion with atheism. Once I said I was going to become vegan, it was just all of a sudden I felt that I'm living the best life I could possibly do. Like, not that I'm better than anybody, but I really feel that I'm living a life that I can be proud of. And
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was living with a girl who was vegetarian, and it never occurred to me to do that. I mean, I didn't criticize her diet. I loved it. She cooked food. I'm not going to complain. I'll eat whatever she makes. Sometimes I would heat up a hot dog on the side, but, I would eat whatever she made. And I gave her a hard time once or twice. I said, because I assumed at the time that anyone who was vegan for ethical reasons. I didn't even know about the environmental reasons. I didn't know about any of the health benefits that you can get if your diet isn't great before you go vegan. But I said, well, why does it make sense to... you do realize that the chickens that lay your eggs are also horribly abused, right? You realize that all the male chickens in the egg industry are thrown to a grinder. And I kind of would... I only brought it up one time, actually, and then she said, well, I'm not vegan for ethical reasons. I'm vegan because... vegetarian. I'm vegetarian because if I allow myself to eat meat, I'm going to eat unhealthy. I go to Taco Bell and I get a soda with it. So this is my way of just making sure I'm healthy. So, okay, fine. But that kind of set the stage, giving her a hard time about going vegetarian but not vegan. Down the line, when it came time to think about my choice, I realized I couldn't go halfway.
Yes.
So, really, there's not much more to my story. I'm mostly to the point. I've gotten all the way past all of these things, and it still hasn't put a dent in my decision to eat meat. I'm still arguing against vegan, and I'm starting to realize there's no good reason to eat meat. There's no justification for killing cow. None of the omnivore arguments that I used really held up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
But the one thing that still made it no big deal was because you're still killing an animal humanely for the most part. And for me, this was what changed that for me was actually a purely emotional thing. After all of this talk about just like cold hard logic, I'm a veterinarian, and I'd euthanized tons of animals before. It's not like this was the first time it had ever happened. But I euthanized somebody's beloved cat. It was a pet that I'd been seeing for 2 years. It was a woman that I'd known for 2 years that was just a lovely person. And I couldn't stop being sad about it. I couldn't stop thinking about how sad it was to euthanize the cat. And I went back to, and this isn't usually a problem for me, because I know when I euthanize an animal, it's for a good reason. It's because the animal is suffering. But something about reflecting on that in the context of all these discussions I'd had about veganism made me think, isn't it kind of a tragedy that an animal died, even if he died humanely? Isn't it still, and what if he hadn't been sick? Like, why am I so against, if somebody, there are people, this was always an ethics question when you're in vet school, there are people literally in this world who buy a puppy or a kitten and they keep it for 9 months, and when it's time to go on summer vacation, they bring it to the vet to have it euthanized, because it's not, first of all, 3 months summer vacation, who's going to put up with the pet? Second
Yeah.
of all, we can get a new puppy next year, and it's
Yeah.
much cuter than an adult. And so then, the ethical question is, well, is it your moral decision, or are you just serving the client's needs? And at the time, it was a challenging question. Should you do it? Do you have a right to refuse? He's already paid you $50 for your office visit. Do you have to refund him the money if you're not going to provide the service he wants? Or and of course, my answer was, no, don't do that. That's awful. And that's pretty much universal. I mean, pretty much every vet would say, no, I'm not going to euthanize your cat or dog just because you don't have time to take care of it if it's perfectly healthy. But if I want to eat it, then go ahead and kill it. Throw it on the barbecue, right? Like what that. So I thought of basically the contrast of how sad it is to kill an animal that we care about, and how we're all against needlessly killing an animal. And then when you compare, so now is where the pros and cons come in. So now I've realized there is harm to killing. I haven't put a specific value on it. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's kind of bad. But you compare that to the benefits of the killing, and it's practically none. In fact, the benefits of killing are outweighed by the benefits of not killing when you look at the environmental impacts of raising the cow in the first place. When you look at the humanitarian impact, when you look at how many more people we could feed. Now, of course, I recognize there might be very specific areas where it might be more beneficial to feed cows on grazeland. But even then, I would challenge that in most cases. You have to be very specific. Give me a region of land, and this is probably for another podcast, and there's probably a genetically engineered crop that grows in that land without as much pollution, without as much land use, etc.
or something is called.
But anyway, there may be exceptions to that. There may be errors.
There's
but the bottom line is,
yeah.
for most of us here in mainstream America, growing the cow and killing the cow causes all this harm. And the good that comes from that is so minimal. Oh, I liked that meal better than that meal. Oh, I like bacon better than I like, anything else for breakfast. I like bacon better than I like strawberry and mango and banana waffles.
And like you said earlier, there's so much that we're leaving out just for the time constraints of our podcast that we do. It takes a long time and a lot of explaining on our reasons for it and our proof of it for it. But my main thing is that what I didn't know, and this is what I was hoping other people could see, is that the ethics part of it, it is sad, but I didn't know it was a choice. Yeah. That you do not need to eat meat or drink dairy to live a healthy life. Yeah. You can still even, like you said earlier, you could still even be junk food. You can still eat unhealthy if you like your candy bars. There's a picture of me somewhere
holding up Oreos and a glass of Pepsi with a bag of chips in my mouth going, this is vegan.
We're not sitting here just eating carrots all day long and feeling sorry for ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful food out there. And just like religion, once I realized that it was a choice that you could choose to not believe and it'd be fine, you can also not eat meat and dairy and be fine. It is just something, and the impacts of it, there's so much, like you said, there's so much more harm than good for the choice of being able to continue to eat it. It's not just about personal preference anymore. There's actual impacts on what you're doing to society and our environment by choosing to continue to do that. And so I cannot turn a blind eye on it anymore. It isn't just about, oh, I don't believe in God and I don't, eat meat. It's more of like, I see that there's a problem. I want to be able to help people with a solution to this problem so we can get going with to better treat our fellow humans and also to be able to keep this world going in a sustainable manner and more of a ethical well-being manner. And so that's where I am right now.
I see two really strong parallels between religion and veganism.
Yes.
It's really hard to consider religion from a detached standpoint while you're religious. It's really hard to consider arguments against God's existence while you believe that if you accept that argument, you're going to hell, right? Like, there's a very strong motivating factor. None of us is completely unbiased in our reasoning. Yes. The same is true of veganism. It's very hard to conclude that veganism is a moral wrong while you're eating a hamburger. It's very hard for your brain to do that. So that's why I think it's a really good idea. She was talking about it is a choice. You can go without it. These meatless Mondays, these skip a meat, go meat free one meal a day.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I think if you're considering veganism, start there, because even if you don't think you're going to be able to keep it up, it's worth making a very small commitment to try to find meals that you can eat that are vegan.
Yes.
And once you start eating those meals, you may find that the roots you had in the logical reasons for eating meat may very well come unrooted and go away, and you may realize that you were holding on to them not for logical reasons, but because your brain wouldn't let you let go.
And these are just our introduction conversion stories. We definitely won't leave you hanging. You know, we'll definitely be here to help answer questions and guide you through your religious, path, whether or not you're going to continue to stay, or if you're trying to get away and need help. And same thing with the vegan. I mean, there's lots of wonderful recipes we'll be posting. We'll definitely send links on, what it is you might have questions about. How bad does it really affect the environment? What is it doing to our health? What if the animal is being raised humanely? And we'll definitely keep going with these, and that's the purpose of why we're doing the podcast. And that kind of goes to what we said with why are we doing it? What is our reason why we just spoke to you for an hour?
Yeah, we want to give you some of the expose you to some of the tools that it might take to get you from A to B, and help you stay there. So
yes.
We're not necessarily, there's a lot of great resources out there. We're not necessarily the best, but we hope that you enjoy listening to us, and maybe we can lead you to some of those places, or maybe you don't need them if you hear it from us.
And if you're already a vegan and you're still questioning spirituality, this is going to be good. If you're already an atheist like us, but you're still having your steak and eggs, then you can keep watching and seeing what we can do about changing those as well.
Okay, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Maybe.
Bye.
Hopefully.